May 13th, 1958. A sun-baked valley in the Jebel region, Algeria. The North African sun hammers down on a landscape of rock, dust, and sparse, thorny scrub. The air is still and heavy with heat. A patrol from the 13th Demi-Brigade of the French Foreign Legion, 13 DBLE, moves with cautious, weary discipline through the rugged hills. This is not the set-piece battlefront of World War II with its defined lines and massive armored formations. This is a counterinsurgency, a dirty, grinding war of ambushes, search operations, and psychological conquest. Algeria is officially a part of France, but since 1954, the National Liberation Front, or FLN, has been waging a fierce guerrilla war for independence. The Legion, an elite unit of volunteers from around the world serving France, is deployed in some of the harshest terrain to seek out FLN fighters, secure populations, and deny the rebels sanctuary. The soldier in the photograph is Legionnaire Roger B., his full surname often withheld, a German volunteer. His uniform is the standard Legion issue for the Algerian theater, a faded green cotton shirt and trousers, pieds noirs rope-soled desert boots, and the iconic white kepi, which is often stained to a practical beige. The landscape around him is not a European battlefield, but the ancient, unforgiving geology of the Algerian interior. The patrol's mission is one of presence and reconnaissance, to move through a sparsely populated area, look for signs of rebel activity, and demonstrate French military control. It is tedious, exhausting, and perpetually tense work. There are no minefields in the tactical sense of World War II's Western Front. The threat here is different: a sniper's bullet from a distant ridge, an improvised explosive device on a mountain trail, or an ambush in a narrow wadi. It is in this context, during a routine halt or a moment of scrutiny, that the Legionnaires find not an enemy, but a casualty of the harsh environment, a severely malnourished, abandoned donkey foal, near death from hunger and dehydration. The decision is instantaneous and pragmatic, yet born of a unit ethos distinct from a regular army. The Legionnaire, following an unspoken code, hoists the emaciated animal onto his shoulders. He is not carrying it across a minefield, he is carrying it back to the relative safety and resources of the Legion's temporary field post, or, as would become its fate, all the way back to the regiment's headquarters. The photograph is snapped by a fellow Legionnaire or an embedded photographer. It captures not a moment of universal wartime heroism from World War II, but a specific, small act of isolated compassion in a vicious, politically complex colonial war. The false minefield narrative attached to this image is a textbook case of how historical misinformation spreads. The reasons are multifaceted and psychologically revealing. First, visual familiarity. The iconography is misleadingly similar to that of World War II. The soldier's uniform, while specific to the French army of the 1950s, shares a generic utilitarian simplicity with 1940s battle dress, especially to an untrained eye. The dry, rocky North African terrain is virtually indistinguishable from that of the 1942-43 Tunisia campaign, where images of Allied and Axis forces in similar settings were burned into the public consciousness. The brain seeks a familiar narrative to explain an unfamiliar image, and the colossal, morally legible framework of World War II is the easiest archive to access. Second, narrative appeal. The fabricated story is a perfect, self-contained parable. It features a clear hero, the compassionate soldier, a clear victim, the innocent animal, a clear inhuman antagonist, the impersonal minefield, and a dramatic, self-sacrificial act, braving explosions to save life. It simplifies a complex, ugly reality into a universally understandable moment of kindness. It provides an emotional shortcut, allowing viewers to engage with a war photograph without confronting the ambiguous, painful politics of the Algerian War, a conflict marked by torture, terrorism, and the bitter end of empire. The World War II narrative sanitizes and universalizes the moment.
Third, the obscurity of the real conflict. For much of the world, especially in the Anglosphere, the Algerian War, 1954 to 1962, remains an obscure footnote compared to the earth-shattering drama of World War II. It was a messy, morally ambiguous struggle that France herself was deeply conflicted about and is still coming to terms with today. There was no clear cinematic victory parade, only a fraught independence and a legacy of trauma. When a powerful image lacks a widely known context, a false but more familiar context rushes in to fill the vacuum. The myth persists because it is constantly being rediscovered by new audiences who lack the specific historical knowledge to challenge it, and because the true story requires an explanation of a war many have never heard of. Understanding the real photograph requires delving into the unique world of the 13 dBLE in 1958. The French Foreign Legion is a singular institution. Founded in 1831, it is composed of foreign volunteers commanded by French officers. Its motto is Legio Patria Nostra, the Legion is our fatherland. It cultivates an identity based on extreme professionalism, unwavering esprit de corps, and a mythos of starting anew, leaving one's past behind. By 1958, its ranks included veterans of the Indochina War, which ended disastrously for France at Dien Bien Phu in 1954, and new recruits from across post-war Europe, often men seeking adventure, escape, or redemption. The Algerian War was the Legion's primary theater. Their role was not that of a conscript army holding a line, but of elite light infantry conducting relentless ratissage, raking over operations, long-range patrols, setting ambushes, and assaulting rebel strongholds in the mountains and deserts. Life was a cycle of brutal marches under crushing heat or cold, sudden vicious firefights, and long periods of isolated garrison duty. In this environment, the unit became a self-contained universe. The rescue of the donkey foal fits perfectly within this Legion microculture. The act was not ordered, it was an impulse that reflected the Legion's peculiar blend of hardened ruthlessness towards the enemy and a fierce, internal solidarity that could extend to a mascot. Regimental mascots were a long-standing tradition, boosting morale and embodying unit identity. This foal wasn't just any animal, it was a potential comrade, a living symbol of the regiment's endurance and its self-sufficiency. Naming it and bringing it into the fold was a way of asserting a semblance of order and companionship in a chaotic, hostile land. The fate of the donkey, often reported to have been named Bambi and to have lived out its days at the Legion's legendary headquarters in Sidi Bel Abbes, completes this true story. It wasn't a one-off rescue, it was an adoption. The photograph captures the beginning of that journey, the moment the isolated, pragmatic compassion of a single legionnaire on patrol transitioned into a regimental affair. While the photograph is not from World War II, that conflict's long shadow is undeniably present in the scene. The French Army of 1958, and the Legion within it, was an institution profoundly shaped by the recent trauma of 1939 to 1945. Many of its senior officers were veterans of the Free French Forces or the Resistance. The equipment, tactics, and even the psychological mindset were evolved from that earlier total war. The soldier carrying the donkey is using skills of endurance and small unit initiative honed in the mountain campaigns of Italy and the Vosges. Furthermore, the very existence of a powerful professional legion in Algeria was partly a result of post-World War II French policy, which sought to maintain imperial prestige and a military capable of fighting the brush fire wars of the decolonization era, a direct consequence of the reshaped global order after 1945. The false caption itself is a kind of back formation, a subconscious attempt to connect this image to the last good war, the one with a clearer moral alignment. It represents a public desire to view soldiers through the lens of World War II's perceived clarity, to see them as liberators rather than as instruments of a fading colonial power. The myth is, in a twisted way, a tribute to the enduring cultural power of the World War II narrative, so strong that it can co-opt and rewrite images from other, less tidy conflicts. So why is this soldier actually carrying a donkey? He is carrying it because his patrol found it dying in a valley far from any minefield. He is carrying it because he serves in the French Foreign Legion, a brotherhood with its own codes, where such an act aligns with a culture of hard-bitten solidarity. He is carrying it back to a regimental home that will adopt it as a mascot, a small island of normalcy in a vicious war of independence that would tear Algeria from France and redefine both nations. The photograph's true power lies not in a fabricated Hollywood-style heroics of World War II, but in its stark, quiet humanity within a specific and terrible conflict. It shows us that moments of compassion are not exclusive to morally unambiguous wars. They occur in the grayest of zones, performed by individuals caught in histories larger than themselves. Debunking the myth is not about taking away a feel-good story. It is about restoring historical dignity to the image. It asks us to look closer, to learn about the forgotten war in Algeria, to understand the complex institution of the Foreign Legion, and to appreciate the real, unvarnished moment for what it was, a simple act of mercy in a rocky valley in 1958, heavy with the weight of an empire's last days, captured in a single, enduring frame. The soldier isn't braving a minefield from a world war. He is carrying a tiny burden of life through the landscape of a bitter, complicated peace that was still years away.
The creation and dissemination of this single photograph is itself a story worth examining. It was almost certainly taken by a fellow Legionnaire, likely using a personal camera, a Kodak Retina, or a similar portable model becoming more common among soldiers in the late 1950s. The composition is deliberate, yet not overly staged. The photographer has framed Legionnaire Roger B. against the vast, empty expanse of the Jebel, emphasizing both the scale of the landscape and the isolation of the patrol. The focus is on the strain in the soldier's body, the taut muscles of his shoulders and neck, and the incongruous, almost pathetic form of the foal. This was not a random snapshot. It was a conscious effort to document an event that resonated with the unit's self-image. The Legion, more than perhaps any other military body, has always been intensely aware of its own mythology. From its founding, it cultivated an aura of mystery, sacrifice, and rugged, unconventional virtue. Photographs like this one served as internal propaganda, reinforcing the Legion's code, unwavering in combat, yet capable of unexpected compassion, a band of outsiders who create their own strict morality. The image would have been circulated within the 13e DBLE, copied, sent home in letters, and likely published in Kepi Blanc, the Legion's official magazine. Its journey from a private memento to a global misattributed icon began in these small, intentional acts of self-documentation. To fully appreciate the photograph's true context, one must understand the stark contrast between its content and the reality of the war in which it was taken. The Algerian War was characterized by a brutal asymmetry.
The French military, one of the world's most sophisticated, fielded helicopters, napalm, and sophisticated radio networks against an FLN guerrilla force that relied on stealth, terror, and the support, willing or coerced, of the civilian population. Tactics on both sides were severe. The FLN targeted French civilians and Pieds de Noir, European settlers, in café bombings and massacres. The French army, desperate to cut the rebels off from their support, employed systematic torture, internment camps, and regroupement, the forced relocation of hundreds of thousands of rural Algerians into controlled villages to deny the FLN sustenance and concealment. The Legion was on the sharp end of this dirty war. Their patrols, like the one in the photograph, were not merely hikes. They were tense, exhausting probes into hostile territory, where every rock could conceal an observer, every shepherd could be a scout, and every peaceful village could erupt an ambush. The psychological pressure was immense. The act of rescuing the donkey foal, therefore, exists within a bizarre cognitive dissonance. It is a moment of pure, uncomplicated kindness set against a backdrop of pervasive fear, suspicion, and institutionalized violence. This dissonance is perhaps why the World War II myth is so comforting. It transplants the act to a war where, in popular memory, the moral lines are drawn more starkly between industrialized armies, away from the intimate, bitter complexities of colonial insurgency and counter-terror. The eventual fate of the donkey foal, adopted, named, and living at Sidi Bel Abbes, places it within a long and vital military tradition, the regimental mascot. From ancient times, armies have kept animals as talismans, pets, and living symbols of unit identity. The British Army has its famous goats, drum horses, and regimental dogs. The U.S. Marine Corps has its bulldog. For the Legion, a unit divorced from national or regional identity, the mascot took on an even deeper significance. These animals, often dogs but sometimes more exotic creatures like camels, or in this case a donkey, became embodied symbols of the Legion itself, resilient, enduring, adaptable, and bound to the unit by a loyalty that transcended nationality. The donkey, nicknamed Bambi in some accounts, would have served a crucial morale function. In the austere, male-dominated and violent world of a Legion outpost, the care and presence of an animal provided a psychological release valve. Feeding, grooming, and simply watching the donkey offered a moment of normalcy, a reminder of a gentler world, and a focus for humor and affection. It was a shared responsibility that reinforced the group's cohesion. The journey from that sun-baked valley to the legendary headquarters at Sidi Bel Abbes, the spiritual mother house of the Legion, transformed the foal from a rescued animal into a living piece of regimental lore. Its presence there would have been a story told to new recruits, a tangible link to the veterans of the Algerian conflict, and a symbol of the Legion's peculiar, enduring soul. The soldier carrying it was, in a very real sense, carrying the future mascot, a small, living investment in the unit's spirit.
Beyond compassion and tradition, the decision to carry the foal was also one of cold, practical logistics. A patrol in the Algerian Jebel operated on a precise calculus of weight, time, and endurance. Every item carried, ammunition, water, radio batteries, rations, was essential. Adding a 50 to 70-pound animal, weak and unable to walk, was a significant burden. So why do it? The alternative, leading it, was also a choice with potential consequences. In a counterinsurgency, where winning hearts and minds was a stated, if often contradicted, tactic, an act of conspicuous cruelty, even towards an animal, could be counterproductive. A local population, already caught between the FLN and the French, might view such an act as characteristic of a merciless occupier. Conversely, an act of mercy could be a tiny point in the French column, a story that might spread. More immediately, for the Legionnaires themselves, leaving a suffering animal to die slowly of starvation and thirst could have a corrosive effect on unit morale during a long, silent march.
In the close-knit, fatalistic world of the Legion, superstition and symbolism held power. Saving a life, even in animals, might be seen as balancing the scales of death they dealt and risked daily. Furthermore, stopping to euthanize the foal would waste time and a bullet, and still leave them with the same ethical residue. Picking it up and carrying it, while physically taxing, resolved the moral and practical dilemma in a way that aligned with the Legion's self-conception as masters of their environment, tough enough to handle the extra burden. It was an assertion of control, a statement that even in this hostile place, their will and their code could impose a small order. The persistence and spread of the World War II Minefield myth is a prime case study for the digital age. Before the internet, such misattributions circulated slowly in books, magazines, or veterans' anecdotes, where they could be challenged by experts in letters to the editor. Today, the image spreads virally across social media platforms like Pinterest, Facebook, and Reddit. Each share recontextualizes it. The original accurate caption is stripped away, and new emotionally resonant captions are added by users seeking to maximize engagement. The algorithm favors the more dramatic, simpler narrative, the World War II Minefield story, because it generates more likes, shares, and comments expressing awe or admiration. Fact-checking is a slow, deliberate process. The spread of the myth is instantaneous. This creates a feedback loop of historical distortion. Well-meaning history pages, unaware of the true context, share the false story. Documentary filmmakers might use it as stock footage under the wrong caption. Each repetition cements the falsehood deeper into public consciousness. Correcting it requires not just presenting the facts of 1958 Algeria, but actively dismantling a more appealing, emotionally satisfying fiction. The photograph thus becomes a battleground not between armies, but between historical accuracy and the human appetite for mythic, universal stories, especially those set against the backdrop of the 20th century's most morally legible conflict, World War II. In the end, the photograph of Legionnaire Roger B. carrying the donkey foal is a far richer historical document than the myth allows. It is not a generic symbol of wartime compassion. It is a specific artifact of a specific time, place, and institution. It tells us about the daily reality of the French Foreign Legion in Algeria, the harshness of the terrain, the isolation of patrols, the unique cultural codes of that force, and the small human strategies for preserving sanity amid a brutal conflict. The soldier's burden is multifaceted. He carries the physical weight of the animal. He carries the ethical weight of a choice made in isolation. He carries, symbolically, the weight of the Legion's tradition and its desperate need for symbols of its own humanity. And finally, the photograph itself now carries the weight of a misguided public memory, struggling to be seen for what it truly is. By restoring its true context, Algeria, 1958, the 13th Demi-Brigade of the French Foreign Legion, we do not diminish the act. We elevate it. We move it from the realm of generic, sentimental fable into the real, complicated world of history. We see it not as a Hollywood moment from a world war, but a genuine, gritty, and profoundly human moment from a forgotten war. It reminds us that kindness is not the sole province of good wars, and that soldiers are never merely the instruments of policy, but individuals who, even in the most ambiguous and violent circumstances, can still choose to shoulder a fragile, living weight and carry it home.